Hello, thank you for joining me, Carter Brothers, on this first of a series of online classes for Second Presbyterian Church, looking at C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape Letters. When Elizabeth Link first asked me about teaching the class, I jumped at the opportunity. The Screwtape Letters is perhaps my favorite book by C.S. Lewis, which, to be honest, is a bit blasphemous for me to say in my house, because most everyone here, I think, prefers Till We Have Faces. But for me, it's definitely Screwtape. It has a place near and dear to my heart, and we'll hear about that in a little later part of this class. And as I thought about the class, I realized, there are available to you right now wonderful resources for studying the Screwtape Letters. Something we'll talk about in just a minute is that the book is set up as a series of 31 letters, and there are study guides that walk you through letter by letter. There are study guides that do that. There are online classes on YouTube that walk you through each letter, and I'm not going to recreate that. What I want to do is talk about some of the major themes that come up in Screwtape that are especially relevant to us as a people of God here in the fall of 2020. And this session is really going to set the stage for that conversation that's going to follow. So you don't have to have read any of the Screwtape Letters to watch this class. And in fact, you don't have to have read much of the book for the next class, but I'll talk about that in just a minute. So let's jump in. And so what I invite you to do is have your book with you as we go through the class. Have a nice cup of tea or coffee, if that's your preference, to go through the class with me, because I'll be having my tea most often when I record these. And let's look at the Screwtape Letters. So today we are going to, again, focus on the background information as to and why I think Screwtape is important and relevant for us today in the fall of 2020 to study it. So let's do a little history. Most folks today know the Screwtape Letters as a book. It was published in 1942, and in fact, it's never gone out of print since then. So your copy might look like one of these. There are other copies available. I have a very, very old copy that looks more like this, but of course, this is my main copy now. But that's how we know it, as a book. So if you're not familiar with the Screwtape Letters, let me give you a little help in understanding what you're about to read, because it's a bit disorienting. The structure of the book itself is, as I said, a series of 31 letters. And they're letters that C.S. Lewis will say he discovered. It's almost like a found footage movie from today, like the Blair Witch Project. And we'll listen to his introduction in a little bit later on in today's class. But again, it's a series of letters, and the main characters you need to know are, of course, the person writing the thing writing the letters is Screwtape, who is some muckety-muck of hell, where he is a master tempter. He is somewhere in the hierarchy of hell, or what Lewis would later call a lowerarchy. And he is writing from this bureaucratic position to his nephew Wormwood, who is an apprentice tempter, who really is on his very first assignment, if you will. And the person that Wormwood is tempting is known to us in the letters simply as the patient. We never know his name. We do know a little bit about him. We know he lives for a while. He lives with his mother. He's eventually going to he'll fall in with some friends, and then he will fall in love. But we never know anybody's names. So each letter will begin, "My dear Wormwood," and then Screwtape will provide his advice. And it always ends, except for two letters, which I think we will listen to, both of those, as "Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape." Now, the trick here is to remember that we are reading letters written from the demon's perspective, the devil's perspective, from Screwtape's perspective. And that can be a bit off-putting at first. So when Screwtape refers to our Father below, he, of course, is referring to Satan. And when Screwtape refers to the enemy, he means God. And this caused some consternation when the letters were first published, because they showed up not as a book, but as a series of weekly articles in an Anglican periodical called The Guardian. That's not the Guardian newspaper that we know today. This was specifically for Anglicans in England, and it was called The Guardian. It's now defunct. But it was released weekly, and about halfway through its run, the Guardian started to get essentially hate mail from certain people writing, "What are you doing?" And in fact, there's a famous letter that Lewis quotes from in a second preface that he writes to Screwtape when it's republished in 1961. But he notes that the Guardian received a cancellation letter from an Anglican priest who said, quote, "Much of the advice given in these letters seems to me not only erroneous, but positively diabolical." Well, that, of course, was the point. And Lewis later, in that later preface said, it caused him some difficulties being in the mindset of the devil for so long. But again, if you've never read them, make sure you realize we're not supposed to follow Screwtape's advice, that this is a bit of reverse psychology where Lewis is writing from the demon's perspective, the devil's perspective, and then we have to sort of invert it. He would later write that he wished he could write the companion piece where he's writing from maybe the patient's guardian angel, but he said he could never write with such language because he's human. He can't write like an angel. So we're left with Screwtape's letters. Now, at this point, those of you that know your European history are thinking, May to November 1941 was a very crucial time period for England, because in the spring of 1940 through the end of 1941, Hitler had launched his attempts to force Britain to surrender through a series of horrendous bombing raids. We know today either as the Blitz or as the Battle of Britain. And it's during this time that Lewis is releasing these letters, during England's great test of its national character, when people were forced to stay indoors. There were nationwide curfews. You would have the blackout periods. If you were trying to navigate your way home at night, there were no streetlights. It was a time of tremendous upheaval, uncertainty, and restrictions on their day-to-day life. And I hope at this point you're starting to think that, well, we don't have bombs falling around us. We know a little bit about some of the uncertainty and the restrictions that English folks were dealing with during this time period. And that's why I think Screwtape will have some relevance for us. Now, my introduction to Screwtape came not through the printed book, but actually through what we then called an audiobook or a book on tape. And that's when John Cleese of Monty Python fame released an audio cassette recording of the Screwtape letters. And unfortunately, these are no longer in print. But fortunately for us, you can find them on YouTube. And we will listen to some of John Cleese's readings of the Screwtape letters throughout the course of this class. So 1986, you might think, why do I remember this? Because in 1986, I went to college. And I went from Nashville, Tennessee, up to the corner of Northwest Massachusetts to Williams College. That is my dorm, my freshman year, and that actually is my room over here on the corner, Oregon 102, where I lived with two roommates. And this is, of course, me back then with my pretty traditional college, my normal college outfit, my white bucks. I wore the duck head pants to sort of stand out from the Northerners. I had my Abercrombie and Fitch big shirt. And what's remarkable is that thanks to COVID, my hair is about as long now as it was when I was back in college. So that's pretty remarkable. I listened to these tapes on my way to college my freshman year. My parents bought the Screwtape letters and we listened to them in the car. It took us 2 days to get to Williams from Nashville. And along the way, we listened to these stories. And I still, to this day, remember how much fun it was to listen to John Cleese read these stories. And a couple of them have stuck in my memory. But of course, the connection for me then is I was introduced to Screwtape at a time when I was about to go through a test of my character. You know, those of us, we've been to college, while it's a wonderful experience, it is a time of testing of our faith, where we're trying to decide who we want to be, who we don't want to be. And for me, Screwtape was with me, and I had these stories to help guide me through that first year. And that's why for me, Screwtape is so important, because it prepared me for this time of testing. So at this point, you're starting to realize, oh, I see what you're doing, Carter. There is a timeliness for us as a people of faith to be studying the Screwtape letters. Obviously, the Battle of Britain is an experience that we don't want to replicate and hope never to experience again. But it was a time of great testing of faith and character. Our freshman years in college, really all 4 years in college, are a time of great testing. And of course, this year, for many of us, has been a year of testing that we've never had to deal with before, whether it's through job loss, whether it's through illness, whether it's through the loss of loved ones from COVID, whether it's from the economic uncertainty, whether it's from the racial unrest that we've been experiencing. And on top of all that, we now have the anxiety of a national election to deal with. And so I want to use Screwtape to help us through this time, to pull out lessons that we can remember as a people of faith to help us deal with what we're experiencing. So I want us to listen to the original preface to Screwtape. Depending on which edition you have, you might have this preface, or you might have a much longer one that talks about the irate Anglican priest who is canceling his subscription. But this is the original preface that was released, and John Cleese is going to read it for us, and that's going to be where we're going to end things. So let's listen to John Cleese's reading of the introduction to C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape Letters.
Audio Literature presents The Screwtape Letters, read by John Cleese.
I'd like first to read the preface written by C.S. Lewis at Magdalen College on July the 5th, 1941. I have no intention of explaining how the correspondence which I now offer to the public fell into my hands. There are two equal and opposite errors into which our race can fall about the devils. One is to disbelieve in their existence, the other is to believe and to feel an excessive and unhealthy interest in them. They themselves are equally pleased by both errors, and hail a materialist or a magician with the same delight. The sort of script which is used in this book can be very easily obtained by anyone who has once learned the knack, but ill-disposed or excitable people who might make a bad use of it shall not learn it from me. Readers are advised to remember that the devil is a liar. Not everything that Screwtape says should be assumed to be true, even from his own angle. I have made no attempt to identify any of the human beings mentioned in the letters, but I think it very unlikely that the portraits, say, of Father Spike or the patient's mother are wholly just. There is wishful thinking in hell as well as on earth. In conclusion, I ought to add that no effort has been made to clear up the chronology of the letters. Number 17 appears to have been composed before rationing became serious. But in general, the diabolical method of dating seems to bear no relation to terrestrial time, and I have not attempted to reproduce it. The history of the European war, except insofar as it happens now and then to impinge upon the spiritual condition of one human being, was obviously of no interest to Screwtape.
that then is our introduction to Screwtape. The next class, we are not going to get very far into Screwtape. In fact, we're going to stop at the dedication page, where we're going to talk about friendship for the ages. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to think about friendship to you, because as we get into Screwtape and we really look at life from his perspective, it does feel fairly bleak and joyless. And so to gird ourselves before jumping into that conversation, I want us to think about something that provides joy, and that's the idea of friendship. And so questions for you to think about before you listen to the next class is, what has happened to your friendships during COVID? How has it been impacted? Have they gotten stronger? Have they gotten weaker? Take it where you will, but think about friendship. And another question I'd ask you is, who are your most important friends, and then why? We're going to talk about that in the next class as we look at that very first page of the Screwtape letters, which is the dedication page. So if you wish to share with me your answers and your thoughts as we go through the class, I've created an email address at screwtapequestions@outlook.com. And you can participate as much as you wish. You can send me emails with written responses, or if you feel so inclined, you can video record them and send them to me, and I'll try to work them into the presentation. Because I do want this to be a conversation as much as it can. I don't want it simply to be me staring at this white light on my computer and sending this out into the void. This is a time for us to come together as a people of faith, to discuss these issues, to grow, to challenge each other, to be encouraged by each other, to take comfort in each other. And so with that, I will sign off by saying, please go in peace to love and serve the Lord. And until we meet again, I remain your affectionate brother in Christ, Carter.